Hello everybody and welcome back to another book review. So a couple of weeks ago, I was reached out to by Moon Books. A friend of mine who writes for them reached out to me and wanted to know if I would like to meet an author who I didn't know. This is a first-time author, somebody who has just started writing for them, and they were very excited about getting the word out for their new book. So I was introduced to the author. I read the galley, the advanced reader copy, and I was absolutely floored. So I knew I had to have him on. So I was sent a physical copy by Trevor Greenfield, who's the main editor over at Moon Books, and I've known quite a few Moon Books authors. Like I quite a few of them are my friends already. So I know generally kind of the type of books that they produce. They produce small introductory texts, usually between 25,000 words and 50,000 words, on very specific subjects connected to neo-paganism. So Morgan Daimler, for example, who's been on the podcast several times, has, I believe, like 30 books with them, something like that, quite a few books. And so their popular Pagan Portals series is quite popular, and I have quite a few of the Moon Books authors coming on as guests. So when I was reached out to, I was really honored and I was really excited to start working with them. And I was sent the e-galley for this book, Bogowie, a study of Eastern Europe's ancient gods by T.D. Kokoszka, and I hope I said that name correctly. So T.D. is originally from Texas. He's of Jewish and Polish background, and he explains that history in the book here. So I was sent the e-galley, and I was also sent a physical copy, and I was absolutely floored. Moon Books is a wonderful publisher for a lot of very specific niche topics within paganism, particularly their deities series, particularly types of magic, and so if you're looking for a book on a particular pagan deity, you can usually find one through Moon Books. So their books tend to be quite small. They tend to be 100 pages, right? And a lot of times they're meant to be introductory texts. What really made me floored with this book is how big it is. This book is 4 times the size of most of the other Moon Books that I've encountered. It's 410 pages, and it is just incredible. The author T.D. is coming onto my podcast in a couple of weeks, and we'll really get into exploring kind of what led to this, what their process was. They talk about it in the book, which I think I think is a really powerful statement. And also, I'll be honest with you, just the academic integrity of this book is incredible. The author doesn't have a religious studies or history or like medieval studies or even Slavic studies background. I believe that TD, where is it here? Microbiology. So they actually hold a BS in a Bachelor of Science in Microbiology, but because they had access to the academic institution and could gather resources, they ended up starting this, and I thought, that's what I would do. Any of my author friends who ever have access to JSTOR are mass downloading as much as they can before the access goes away, right? So a little bit about the author here. So T.D. Kokoszka studied microbiology at Texas State and graduated in 2013 with a BS in microbiology. However, he used his time at Texas State to research leading scholars such as Vernadsky and Ivanits and the topic of Slavic history. During this time, he cultivated connections with ADF, the Druid organization, and utilized their research-oriented methodology for his own purposes. And those of you who don't know kind of the methodology of the ADF, So how they approach researching and developing and reconstructing ancient systems is they do it by cross-analysis. So when it comes to the IE cultures, which is, in Europe at least, or most of them, like the Slavic, the Greco-Roman, the Celtic, the Germanic, and the Norse and the Scandinavian, all of those cultures, and many of the smaller cultures within those regions originate from a supposed theoretical Indo-European root culture, connected by language, so not connected by necessarily genotype or through genetics, but definitely by culture. And so what ADF does is it lays out all of the major IE cultures, which includes Persia, which includes Indian and South Asian cultures, and they do a cross-analysis. So it's kind of like Jurassic Park in a way, right? You know, Jurassic Park, they reconstituted the DNA by placing in the missing elements from other species. But in this case, what happens is they do a cross-analysis looking at common features found throughout those cultures in reconstructing something that would have been very similar. So if, for example, fire worship is a big feature across the IE spectrum, and so if a particular culture doesn't seem to have fire reverence within their surviving text or within their surviving material, then they do a cross-analysis and they can make a guesstimation that, well, fire must have been important because these other elements are here. And so I think that was it's a very interesting way of approaching. And I recognized instantly when I read that and I started to look at TD's methodology in this book, made total sense. I could definitely see that. So what he has done is he's created a book, and this is his first book. This is huge for a first time. And I can see why Moonbooks is so excited about it. So what he's done is he's gone through. First of all, I mean, he comes from a Polish background, but he approaches the material from a pan-Slavic context, so looking at common roots of many Slavic cultures. Most Slavic languages originated in kind of Kievan Rus area and then expanded outwards. That was really the source of many of the Slavic or many of the Slavic languages at least. So they had a commonality of culture, they had a commonality of language, and but that context is also connected to all the other contexts around those that Central European Eastern European area. So he goes chapter by chapter looking at some of the major divinities that are within the Slavic pantheon, but also talking about regional variations, and also talking about then parallels within other neighboring cultures. So he places the Slavic deities in context with like the Finno-Ugric, the Baltic, the Germanic, even sometimes the Greco-Roman, and places them in context, and then talking about them from then a regionalism point of view. So, he doesn't just say Slavic pantheon, he talks about this kind of pan-Slavic approach, this pan-Slavic continuum, as a continuum. So, whereas, say, one deity, Volos, or Veles, appears in this way in this culture, on the other side of the Slavic kind of continuum, he appears in this, and so on and so on. I think one of the most important pieces here, and which I think is why this book in particular is going to become really important, is he tends to focus a lot on uncovering the Soviet bias in a lot of the written material. So a lot of the written material that the Slavic, at least in English, that the Slavic traditions have, has a Christian or a supposed Christian bias, and also a Soviet bias. And so he goes through those written materials, and particularly some of the oldest Slavic folklorists who would have been working just at the start of the Soviet era, and either dismantles or uncovers the inherent bias within that, and makes questions the assumptions that are inherent. I also really appreciate that he goes very anti-folkish with this, because let's be honest here, there's a lot of issues within kind of Eastern European or Slavic paganisms, rodnovery, around white supremacy and around racism and insularism, and that particularly shows up in North American diaspora in the same way that Scandinavian traditions and to some degree Anglo-Saxon traditions have that kind of folkish quality to it, and an issue, I should say, because not all, don't get me wrong, not all practitioners of those traditions are white supremacists or racist. They have a big issue with people coming into these traditions with that kind of point of view. So I really, really appreciated that he talks about that in this. I'm just floored. I really am. I think that it's just a wonderful addition to anybody's library. Anybody who is interested in kind of cross-cultural analysis. Anyone who's interested in stories too. Because another feature of this book is it's not just pure kind of academic data. He intersperses that context with stories from the folkloric sources, so and then discusses them, and so it's not just purely kind of an academic approach. You really do get a lot of the storytelling that would have and still is such a strong part of the culture. I think that I would say that this is a 4.5 out of 5, mainly because at times I think that it can become a little too scholarly, but I also realize with that many people who are attracted to uncovering and reconstructing these traditions for themselves, especially those of a Slavic background, they tend to be very connected to scholarly research anyways. And so I think that they will really appreciate what T.D. Kokoszka has had to say with this. But I also think that for a general reader, I would say that this book is not a beginner's book, but I would say that after you've gone through a beginner's book, move on to this book to deepen. This is a deeper book. This is a book that will allow you to go deeper into these beings, into these individual figures. Once you've been introduced to them and had formed that kind of more childlike understanding of them, just to figure out who they all are and figure out how they're different from, say, the Greco-Roman or the Celtic or the Norse. I think that he does a really wonderful job of discussing the similarities between many of these figures and their counterparts in surrounding cultures, but I think that can get very confusing. And for me, not coming from a Slavic background, but having some understanding of them a little bit, enough that I could follow along and see what he was doing with this, I feel like this would be a little overwhelming. But at the same time, I think that this is an absolute necessity for anybody's library. And I think anybody who's interested in even connecting with kind of understanding the roots of some of our own kind of Western European, well, my own, and any of my followers who are of that background too, those traditions, I think is really important. I think another big piece that goes along with this book is that the expanse of time that he focuses on. He talks about the Neolithic. He talks about cultures from 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 years ago. So he really gives the context for the landscape of the Slavic lands, which I think is really important. So watch out for the episode of the interview that I'm going to have with him coming up. That will be coming out in my fall series. And otherwise, this is now out for pre-order. No, this is available. You can actually order this and get a copy through Moonbooks. In North America, I believe you can get this at, I think, Amazon. I can't think of which distributor sells these, but you can definitely get these on Amazon. I know a couple of stores also have them too. There's a few stores that will that bring in Moonbooks regularly too. If you're up in Canada, it's available wherever most books are sold. Anyways, thank you for joining me for the past 15 minutes, and I'll see you at the next book talk.